Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Wrap. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, today joined by Mr. Terence Corrigan. Just a note, we are recording a little bit earlier than usual, so if something absolutely crazy happens, if we don't cover on the story on the show today, that's probably why. But let's get into the first and most important news story of today, and this is that South Africa's unemployment crisis, already amongst one of the worst in the world, if not the worst in the world, has worsened in the first quarter of 2025. The official unemployment rate, which is the unemployment rate that does not include people who have given up searching for work, has increased by 1 percentage point, up to 32.9%. And the expanded definition of unemployment, which includes those who have given up looking for work, has risen from 41.9%, already an incredibly high number, to 43.1%, which is an absolutely terrible statistic. If you look at some of the provinces on the expanded definition, you've got a province like Northwest, where over half of all South Africans who are interested in having a job are unfortunately unemployed or have given up looking for work, even though they would like a job. Even worse is that the unemployment rate amongst university graduates or younger than 35 has now reached almost 24%, which is a really shocking statistic because those are the people in society who are best equipped to be able to enter the workforce. An economist for Anchor Capital said that that big-time job creation, material job creation as he calls it, basically only occurs when GDP growth is around 3% per year. Unfortunately, South Africa is looking to be somewhere around 1% GDP growth this year. So we are far off creating jobs. There was a great opinion piece, I think it was yesterday, from Michael Avery. I think it was in Business Live, talking about South Africa not having a transformation problem, but having a growth problem. And Terence, I think that kind of nails this exactly right. Unemployment is the big crisis in South Africa, and we have not seen anything like the reforms we need to see to get it changing under the government of national unity.
Yeah, there's polling evidence that goes back into the 1990s, and although I'm not au fait with it, I imagine if you scroll back further than that, that would probably be the number one issue. Now, I remember the Institute released a poll in, I think, about 2001, saying that people were more concerned about jobs than racism. Esop Ahad, who was the minister in the presidency, referred to the Institute as those foolish people. Because, of course, we were all like obsessed with race and we didn't really care about people not having jobs. Anyway, that's I don't think anyone would make that argument now. Yes, you have to expand the ability of an economy to generate wealth, and people are then hired to help you do that. You don't do this as a social welfare measure. I think every incentive is sort of stacked up in the wrong way. Now, you mentioned the policy environment, and that's true. But I think, in a sense, that's been superseded by the fact that, just the economic foundations don't function. Local government doesn't work when roads are in a shocking state where it's a kind of bring your own infrastructure economy. Don't expect a great deal to happen. And I really think that the beginning of wisdom on this would be an acknowledgement that South Africa is just not an attractive investment destination. And I don't mean for foreign white monopoly capital or imperialist capital or whatever. I'm talking about, for locals. The one great safety valve which these numbers don't capture, which Gigi Alcock has explored in great detail, is the sort of informal grey economy. And so if you take that into account, actually these numbers look a lot better. But that still is a very, very small portion of the country's GDP and the ability to create wealth. The last time we had 3% was, I think it was during the Zuma years. Oh no, sorry, it was the bounce back after COVID, but that was exceptional. You have, when one looks nostalgically at the Zuma years, you're in trouble.
That's exactly right. And I think it suggests that the political pressure on government to actually change the way it's doing things is only going to grow. This doubling down on employment equity, on destroying property rights through the expropriation bill, all these sort of pet projects like NHI, which are unaffordable, are just not going to be acceptable to the public as things go forward. And I think one of the interesting things has been watching how the ANC seems to have been kind of unable to respond to this crisis, just kind of sort of fumbling the ball and just doubling down on what they already know rather than actually trying something different.
Yeah, well, look, I think it's seeing the pressure, but it's just misreading it. Yes, if we can just be more coercive, somehow this will happen. A couple of weeks ago, I discussed South Africa's budget as being about appeasing three pressure groups. One of the welfare grant recipients, whom I would say is probably those who have the greatest moral and practical claim. Secondly, it's civil servants, and thirdly, it's your sort of tender dependent business people, of whom part are operating legitimately and are just taking advantage of an opportunity that's there for them, and then there's a whole kind of gray and illegal economy that sort of sucks on the teat of it. So the problem is that that the pressure incentives all work in the wrong way. The most obvious group to cut are those, is the feeding tube to your tenderpreneurs, but they have disproportionate political influence. As far as civil service reform goes, they sort of, they remain a very tightly organized group, so they're also very, very difficult to deal with. Those most dependent on state grants, most of whom would prefer a job that pays 5 or 6 times anything that they could hope to get via the state, just don't have that sort of influence. And as far as call it productive business goes, virtually none at all. Or at least the idea has historically been to buy them off with a weekend with the president where we can all discuss what needs to be done and have that discussion again and again and again and again. So until you do something different, you'll get the same results.
Yeah, exactly. Let's move on to our next story. My colleagues, while I wasn't here yesterday, discussed a potential trade deal between South Africa and a meeting between President Cyril Ramaphosa and Donald Trump, President of the US. Sort of yesterday, we also saw Cyril Ramaphosa doing, I think, a little bit of a bit of PR. I don't know what to call it. A bit of a PR tour when he went to the big agricultural festival, the biggest one in the Southern Hemisphere, NAMPO, which is by Bothaville in the Free State, yesterday. Ramaphosa said that he was attending NAMPO at the instigation of his farm manager, who wanted to expose him to new technologies and balers and planters and the like, and that he was attending not as a politician, but as a farmer himself. I think that that was probably laying it on a bit thick. I don't think it's any surprise that he visited yesterday. I think he's trying to shore up his support, and it looks like he cares about issues affecting the farming community, particularly with the pressure that's been put on him from the United States. Ramaphosa did talk a little bit there about the Afrikaners who've been granted refugee status in the US, the South Africans who've been granted refugee status in the US, saying that he thought it was a sad moment for South Africans who had left. They may be feeling excited they've left the country. They've got someone like President Trump, but in the end, it's a group of South Africans demonstrating the changes and transformation that we're embarking on here that they are not favorably disposed to, and that's why they're running away. He said South Africans were resilient and did not run away from problems. He said, quote, "If you look at all the national groups in our country, black and white, we've stayed in this country because it's our country. We must not run away from our problems. We must stay here and solve our problems. So when you run away, you're a coward. That's a real cowardly act. I expect every South African to stay here and we work together and we solve our problems." So sort of trying to, I think, balance two things at once. One hand, he's trying to kind of keep the ANC happy by talking a bit tough on this one and sounding very nationalistic. And I think there are quite a few South Africans who are probably amenable to that message, Terence. But at the same time, he's also trying to show that he cares about these issues. So I suspect that when he does speak to Trump, he will be able to say, but, I just visited NAMPO a few weeks ago. What's your take on this?
Well, one of the first things when I read the reports about it was incredibly patronizing. This is the same president who was deeply saddened or was not pleased by the state of Johannesburg, as though this was a new revelation. Look, our president is very good in talking to his audience. But I imagine him very, very avuncular, nice guy in person. And this is the kind of thing he does well. Interesting though, if you look at the Daily Maverick's coverage of this, while being very much on side with the message about refugees, always referred to in inverted commas, etc., it does speak to a couple of actual farmers who all make it clear that they don't intend to go anywhere, and they're not on side with the refugee or the genocide narrative. But they're also very clear the government is not pro-farmer. It is a hostile environment to operate on. Remember that we now have new water regulations that tie your water use to your race. We've got the Expropriation Act. The government itself, people whom I respect, who have a much more, let's say, accommodating view of state policy. I'm talking people like Wandile Sihlobo. We'll talk about the vast agricultural holdings that the state has, which it just doesn't want to transfer. And frankly, I think that what you have in the state agricultural space speaks to a mindset that is not actually interested in farming. It's interested in, let's say, the relations of agricultural production, which I think was actually used in a government green paper at one stage. So the thing is, talk is cheap. Rhetoric substitutes for action. Incidentally, as long as I'm referring to the Daily Maverick, I remember something Rebecca Davis wrote shortly after the July 2021 riots, when Ramaphosa used the phrase, South Africans are resilient. She says, I'm so sick of being told that we must be resilient. Said, we're not sexy or grumpy or angry or happy. We are resilient. We are a nation of little battlers, and she's sick of it. And I imagine that there are many farmers at NAMPO who reckon, wouldn't it be great if I could just come here to look at that latest technology and decide how I'm going to farm, not how I'm going to manage history.
Yeah, very well said.
And if I may add this, I do think that while I think Trump has been talking a lot of nonsense, about genocide and whatever, and entirely on board there. And I think there's a conversation to be had about whether this group are refugees or are people taking a gap. It has hit a very sore point with both the state and with a lot of commentators. Hence the wall-to-wall coverage and the constant sense that you have to debunk it. But here's the thing: this is just the latest in a wave of the bleeding of South Africans abroad. In the in the 1990s, it was well-heeled Anglophone professionals from Joburg's northern suburbs. Then it became the Van Dondas and the Van Aswiergens. Then it was the Padiachis and the Chetties. And now it's the full rainbow nation, heading abroad. Be worried about that. Be very, very worried, and don't. The point is not so much that 49 people left. The point is, why did they want to leave? And this is the question which I don't think is being asked or adequately discussed.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I just think there's so many industries where people complain about skills leaving, about South Africans seeking better opportunities abroad. I think of nursing, I believe, is one of the industries that has that problem. And it is a huge crisis because our most valuable resource is ultimately our human capital. And if all of our best people are going overseas to seek opportunities, the opportunities to build a better country are slipping through our fingers.
Yeah, look,
Okay.
A school friend of mine who works as a doctor in Canada actually told me that he part of his job is vetting applications for jobs, and he gets them from all over the world. And he said the change in the ethnic profile of South Africans applying, just as I said, it started off with the Anglophones, and now he's receiving applications from African South Africans.
All right, let's move on to our next story. And I think this is connected actually to the, why people might be wanting to leave. And this is talk about the implementation of the National Health Insurance Fund. This is an idea that government will basically take over the medical aid industry. And there's some talk that kind of the starting point of actually implementing NHI might be to turn the civil servants medical scheme benefits into one that kind of forms the basis of NHI and then expanding it out from there. Now, unions have been, being allied to the government, have been pretty supportive of NHI so far. They're sort of ideologically predisposed towards it. But there is some concern that civil servants may become a very big sticking point and provide a lot of opposition to NHI if they perhaps see some of their benefits be disappearing down the drain. Terence, what do you make of this?
Yeah, the idea that we are all in favor of certain things in principle and not so much in specific and in the specifics and in the execution. Yes, there's been a lot of discussion lately about whether BEE drove the development of a black middle class, and I would say there is some truth to that, not to the extent that's been proposed, but one of the big drivers was the civil service. If you think about this, it was it's stable, well-paid employment, white collar, with the respect and the benefits that gives, and it's also secure, and that I think is very, very important. You are talking about a population that was often confined to live in this sort of precarious, sort of fringe of the economy. Now you are in the center, and you've got the pay, the benefits, the prestige. Yeah, along comes NHI. Well, you will either have one of two things. You will either have vastly reduced services because there's just no way you can extend privately funded benefits to the entire population with the envelope that we have. It may be, you can call it inequitable, but there it is. So yes, rather than waiting a week for your operation, you'll now wait 2, 3, 4 years. That's or you will end up having to pay a great deal more, and that is really going to start chewing into your ability to sort of live a good life. And remember, many civil servants, for various cultural and historical reasons, are not only responsible for themselves and an immediate family, but there's often an extended family that depends on them. Plus, our civil service is disproportionately a first and to some extent now second generation middle class. These are people who often became very, very heavily indebted because they didn't have historical wealth or assets. So yes, if you are going to sort of, we say, we can offer you half of your current benefits at double the price. That's not going to be great. So yes, I think, what do they say? The beginnings of wisdom is acknowledgement that there's a problem. I would say that applies to unemployment. It also applies to something like this. There is no magic situation where you can say, well, we'll get twice the outcome at half the cost. Not going to happen.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, that's all the time we have for today. We hope you found the show interesting, and we will see you tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone, and have a great day. Daily Friend Show and The Daily Friend are a project of the Institute of Race Relations, the IRR. The IRR is a think tank which was founded in 1929 to study race relations in South Africa and works to change government policy to improve race relations through non-racialism and to ensure the prosperity of all South Africans. If you like our work and would like to support us, please go to irr.org.za and click Support the IRR. Or you can go to thedailyfriend.co.za and click the Fund Us button.